you as well. It's been a while.
It's been a while indeed. Yeah, so if you want to get started, I can see your screen and here we go.
Fantastic. It's super great being here, and always the D365 Saturday. It's super exciting because it's just the best brains coming together. So super excited. Today, given that this is the last session here, we're gonna have also a little bit of fun, and we're gonna take a different route with regards to this presentation, and also share some pretty good knowledge that we gained over the past few years as we architect solutions around D365 field service. Also, we're going to talk a little bit about Wave 2, right? So that's pretty important here as how that plays along with the future implementations for field service. So today we got a jam-packed session here. We also have a guest speaker. I'm going to introduce him here as well, but also want to make it a conversation so that if you guys have any questions or anything, put it in the chat. I'm going to be monitoring it right there, just in case anything comes up. And this is a very deep and wide topic because it affects a lot of the projects that you may have been a part of. So want to make sure that it takes some time to answer questions. Also, we're going to get a little bit technical as well. So if you guys want to dig in into a specific question, comment, issue that you guys have seen, feel free to do so. So let's go ahead and get started. You guys can hear me okay? Is that correct?
Absolutely.
Awesome. All right, let's do this. So let's go to the next one. So who am I? Who's this guy who's talking to you guys? So my name is Lucas Diaz, and I am the co-founder of Ludia Consulting, and I've been doing field service close to 15 years now in very different areas: technical, functional, leadership, deployment, implementation, you name it. And so some of the stuff that I'm sharing with you together with Andreas is really our hands-on experience, right? And looking into the future, so how everything's going to be, and some of our recommendations as you guys approach this topic. Why is this important? Because we foresee that field service projects are going to keep on increasing, not only in size and complexity, but also the way that they integrate, for example, asset management or agreement management and things like that. So you guys are going to see me talk a little bit about that, but this is all my experience coming forward here with you guys, and I hope you like it. The second is that we're going to kind of take a different turn. I know some of you guys may have seen a version of this. We like to call it the good, the bad, and the ugly. And I don't know if you guys have seen the movie, but it's a little bit like that, right? So we want to introduce some old Western to this presentation, but also talk a little bit about the future, and also mention a little bit about Wave 2. So also at the very end, we're going to leave you guys with a lot of nuggets of information as to recommendations or being able to ask some questions and having an open conversation. So already introduced myself, just going to be very quickly here. So do a lot of global delivery management experience around field service. And so being a part of many different oil and gas, medical device, public sector, distribution, manufacturing, HRM, and field service projects. So you guys are going to see a lot of blends coming in together into this presentation. With us, we're also going to have Andreas, who is really the technical guru on all things integrations. And he is going to be joining us here shortly, but he's also very experienced in field service and have the absolute pressure of working with him all the time on all these projects. So let's get to it. So we talked about the good, the bad, and the ugly in the future. So we're going to have any of you guys seen this movie before? Anyone?
If I say yes, then everybody knows that I'm old. So
Yeah, so this is a very old school movie. It's a very old Clint Eastwood type of thing. So if you guys haven't seen it, please do so. It's one of the classics there. So let's go forward. Let's take a little bit. Let's get into the topic here and talk about the good, right? So you or I or anybody here has an implementation, and we're going to talk about field service, and it happens to be to integrate with ERP. So obviously, you guys know that there's a number of ERPs out there, but we're going to focus around Dynamics or F&O and kind of what's out of the box, right? Like the Microsoft goes really goes a little bit far and above to provide kind of like a methodology or project or templates that you can use in order to connect with F&O. So that's the good, right? So boom. I don't know if you guys are very familiar with the field service integration, and it works really out of the box as advertised. Obviously, if you guys go to make.powerups.com, go to the administration, and set up your integration, there's kind of two templates that you can use here in order to connect. So this is actually super interesting because if you guys know field service like we do, you guys notice that there's a little bit of interesting gaps or things that have to be reversed in order for you to actually do something useful. So there's a P&I, the project and inventory solution, and there's a P2C, the prospect to cash solutions that you got to get loaded in order for you to have a working integration. And out of the box, I don't know if you guys can see there the red boxes around it, is that we really have, for example, warehouses. Warehouses make a lot of sense to be able to have the F&O inventory management, warehouse, and mins and maxes, all that good stuff, sites and such, set up in an ERP because that's where really you do your POs and your inventory management as a whole. That kind of goes together really well with on-hand information. So that is, for example, your specialists or technicians on-hand warehouse quantities, right? So I want to know if Lucas Diaz has 10 of them and 10 of XYZ widgets in their on-hand inventory. So that actually works really well. The interesting part is that normally when we go into inventory transfer there, we normally actually want to have what we call a system of record. So we normally want to keep everything within one because the right hand may not be talking to the left hand when it comes to field service. In other words, you do not necessarily want a service coordinator or dispatcher to go ahead and do a transfer when there's some reservations on the other side of the pond per se. And so sometimes when you look at inventory transfers, you really have to be pragmatic as to who is going to be looking at this data, who's going to be doing manipulations or any transfers as well. I think the same thing goes for inventory adjustments. So for example, if it's a pure field service implementation and there's no other inventory for anything else, then that makes sense. But in the case that you have installs, you're doing builds, you may be manufacturing some of the stuff that you service, you may want to look at actually reversing the direction of that integration. The cool part is that you can actually configure it to go the other way, but keep in mind that the inventory adjustments could have some ramifications into your ERP. So now I'm kind of walking left to right here. And one of the things that is pretty important for us to marry this to things is projects and sales orders, right? So projects, if you guys are familiar with F&O, is basically all the financial projects, what we call them buckets per se, in which costs are and prices or costs are going to come into. The good part and the bad part is that projects only get you so far, right? Really, what you really want to know when you approach it from a field service perspective, you need agreements. Agreements in there is really what matches what cost you have. So let's say you went and bought something in Best Buy, right? And you have a warranty that for a year or something like that, or an extended warranty. And then you not necessarily have a project, you most likely have an agreement in which the costs go into it. What if I want to renew that next year? So this kind of concept starts falling apart when you start dealing with warranties or agreements, and also the invoicing itself. So the interesting part here is that we have the sales order integration and project. Not everything that you want to send out becomes a sales order, right? There's internal work orders and things like that. So there's this gap here is actually pretty interesting for us. Microsoft gives you an out of the box, right, connectivity or projects here that you can use, but keep in mind that you may not just want to say set it and forget it. You may want to look at what you're trying to do. Products, pretty self-explanatory there. The interesting part is that you're going to have service or inventory, non-inventory, or service products. And so you want to make sure that you understand that then when they're created in F&O and come into CE or field service, what happens when you use one of these products, right? It has to go back, whether you want it to land in the service management or EAM. You want to understand and make sure that the product lifecycle matches what you're trying to do there from an integration perspective. So those are kind of little bits of information that we always, in every single implementation that involves ERP, we have sort of those things. So it's from a good perspective, there's a starting point, but there's some work to do. So now going into P2C, so it depends on how your CE implementation is. So you want to perhaps have the customer be flipped, because customers may actually be entered into F&O first and making in the system of record. So one of the things is we want to make sure it's system of record, just make sure that you know exactly kind of what you want to do there. And so as we keep going to the right, you may or may not have quotes, or quotes may come from an external system or come from somewhere else entirely. And at the very end is if you have invoices, back again from what we're talking about here, are they tied to an agreement? Are they tied to a project? How is that going to flow? And also how you're going to present that within field service. So this is the good. This is the good as in what is out of the box. Obviously, there's some prerequisites. And now with wave two, I know that the team, there's a lot of dual right communications around it. So Rama and team are progressing in this, in making this a dual right sort of thing, a sort of story. And there's new entities or new changes that we have in items like customer assets, right, that we want to look at as part of setting up this integration. So we'll get into that in a little bit. I'm going to kind of slow down. I know I just laid a bunch of information so far. Are there any questions?
We just had one question that said, what overlaps do you see between what field service offers with a traditional back office ERP system, and what functionality of field service do you leave for an ERP system to handle?
Yes, that's a great question. It's a deep question. So Reza, thank you. So one of those things is let you take a step back and you want to make sure that you allow the system that does whatever does best to be the system of record. In this case, for example, agreements. So agreements is very well tied in and baked into the F&O functionality. There's agreement lines. There is agreement types. There's also an association with customer assets or service objects in there. So normally, if we have a traditional back office ERP that handles it well, we kind of leave it there and let field service do its thing and bring some of that data over. Some of the other things, obviously, like scheduling and things like that. This is not necessarily a scheduling session, but any scheduling, anything that is very dynamic, we try to do it on the FS side much better. So you have to step back, take a wide look, and see how everything's going to work, and then after that, set up the integration strategy. Awesome, Reza. Did that answer your question?
You always do. Thank you, sir.
Hey, my pleasure. Awesome. So can't give you the good without giving you the bad. So again, this picture cracks me up every single time. But I got to give you guys the bad, right? What is going on? That there's certain things as implementers that you gotta look out for, right? And what are you gonna do to resolve it? So I'm gonna plant some seeds in your guys' head to look at what's the bad, right? So notice 2 slides ago, there's nowhere in there that we were talking about workers, agreement lines. I think we just talked about that, service objects or parts requests. None of that, right? That the integration doesn't really go deep into that. Hey, Andres. So the integration doesn't really go into that. So the bad, let's think about it. Are all workers going to be bookable resources? So you guys know that there's bookable resources that must come across associated with a user and so on. And some of those workers are their contractors, right? So we have to have a baseline understanding of the worker or maybe some um, HR kind of processes in order for us to set up our resources or bookable resources pretty well. And also, what about vendors? Do you have a vendor that is working on behalf of your company? And does it need to be a contractor or does it need to be followed? What about expenses? Or what about when you get an invoice from that vendor? Do you track it as a work order? Do you track it associated with a worker or a sub? How are you going to do that? So those are those things that in order for us to have a field service implementation, we gotta get answers, right? And so that affects your implementation and integration strategy. So the other part of it is agreement lines. So we talked about earlier about going into Best Buy and going and buying a TV, right? So or a whole entertainment system, let's say that. But I want to have a coverage, a 1 year coverage for the TV, 2 years for um, the console, 3 years for the DVD, whatever you want. So also, how are you going to cover that? How are you going to cover that within CE, right? And how are you going to bring some of those entities over so that when a field tech is looking at it, then you're able to basically set a structure so they know, oh, the TV is covered, but you know what, not the DVR or whatever you have or Xbox. Also, what about agreement renewals or intervals? So F&O, so Reza, back to your original question, F&O kind of sucks at this, right? The intervals, but CE has a very much developed PM or TNI or test and inspect kind of functionality in which we create work orders. But so you want to look at to see that functionality. And the second one or the last one is the customer asset categories or groups. How do you want to track this? So if I have a bunch of TVs, do I have a bunch of Samsung TVs? And what if I want to cover all electronics in a house? Like you get a super complete package that you buy at Best Buy that it just covers soup to nuts, everything. So how do you track that in the system? And then how do you set an integration so that you let F&O know that that was sold, right? Or CE. So I'm seeing another question from Reza. How do you handle master data between your field service and ERP system? Do you bring the data over to FS or do you use virtual entities? When do you use each approach? This one's interesting. So I think we're going to get into that also a little bit with Andreas, a little bit more. But yes, when we set up, so as you guys know, full transparency, dual write is still in its infancy in some areas. So we had to do a lot of DI integrations, right? So we had to make sure that we set up what was out of the box. And so we made RESA at the beginning is every entity or group per se has a system of record. So you want workers to be in F&O, you want work orders to reside on CE, agreements in F&O, service objects or customer assets in CE. So you got to pick according to how it best fits your business processes in your implementation. Okay. So lastly, check this out. So we go into service objects or EAM. So speaking specifically of Wave 2, right, we are going to start seeing Microsoft go a lot more towards the EAM, right, the enterprise asset management route, in which they're gonna, funny enough, there's some overlap there that is starting to happen and will continue to happen in the future. From a Microsoft perspective, we expect the next release, so not this Wave 2, the 2021 release, to have a lot more EAM style functionality. We've seen that from Microsoft now. And so you want to start thinking of this customer asset categories. Do we need to group them? Do we need to put them? How do we maintain them? How do we have a view of the asset itself through its entire lifespan? So this is something that really think about. And it's, if we go 2 slides back, actually I'll do that in a minute, is you will see where the gaps start to appear. In the very last one is, what about a parts request? So my name is Lucas Diaz. I'm going to go ahead and call in a part. How does that happen? Do I really need to make a phone call in 2020 every single time? I want to log it as part of my device. So how are we going to allow for that functionality in RMAs? So actually, I'm going to go back in time to the good. And now you see a little bit of the gap that we're seeing here. right? So we have a baseline, and we have to really take into consideration the external, the other pieces that really make field service work end to end in order for us to be successful. And the next thing is that now wave two, we're progressing dual rights. So some of these arrows, right, it won't make as much sense, but we have to be careful as to who edits what data on each side of the application or the pond per se here. Awesome. So let's go into the ugly. So talked a little bit about some of the issues that we had with the eye, and then I'm going to hand it over to Andreas here to go into more details. But it's really it's some of the ugly things that happen in the legal entities, right? Companies. How do we integrate? So F&O has legal entities, and how do we make sure that they land correctly into CE? What about how often does this data come across? Especially with DI, right? You have some schedule running, and then the data integrator project migration. So how do you manage and make sure that all this integration looks good, right? So how do we know that this is gonna work in every single environment? And also mapping, because I don't think there's a exact mapping between CE and F&O. Some massaging needs to happen in between there. So Andreas, any other comments? Did I miss anything? Anything you want me to add here?
No, this is great. And hello, everybody. So Reza, you had a question around virtual entities. We, in our experience, I'll just take that question to kick off. And again, hello, everyone. I'm Lucas's other half as part of Ludia. Regarding virtual entities, one of the things that when we looked at them, now granted this was a little while back, but when we looked at them, the GUID has to be the primary key, and so that becomes a little bit of a challenge when you have to go between the systems. As I think most of you may or may not know, in F&O, a primary key, while every single table has a rec ID, the primary key is typically sort of the sales order number, the work order number. In CE or in field service, your primary key is always your GUID. And so mapping between those with virtual entities becomes a little bit of a challenge. The other challenge is that virtual entities are not change tracking enabled. So you're going to have to send all of your data every single time with a virtual entity. So in the discussion of where does a virtual entity make sense, typically for supplemental setup data, it's sort of a one-off where you have to send everything every single time. For transactional data or for master data, it's typically not a good fit, because for master data you do want, again, it depends on the size of your customer and the size of the data set in general, but you want to architect the integration with incremental changes or deltas being sent between the systems. So Reza, I hope that answered your question.
It did. The only thing that I would add, Andreas, is I do agree with you. The virtual entities introduce some complications. Also, when you want to take those data offline into mobile, virtual entities is not going to help. However, at one point, I'm hoping that you guys can shed some lights that around what's the alternative when you bring the master data from your ERP system to Dynamics 365. How do you ensure that that master data remains intact and your ERP system is still the source of the truth?
Great question. And the simple answer is that what we've done is we've identified which system is the source of truth and then locked down the receiving system with security. So let's take products as an example. One of the more recent clients we're working on still, actually, the product master lives in F&O or FNSC now, and we send the products to CE, and it's an incremental change. The products themselves in CE are locked down. You cannot make a change to the data set itself. So it becomes more of a business process. If you want to change a product, or if you want to change the name, or have a new product created, the customer will have to follow a certain sequence of events to properly work with the systems. That's how we have dealt with that.
Yeah, and we just saw another question from Top One. Who is Top One? That's an awesome nickname there. What is the best practical way of putting together ERP financial information in cases together as well, which work well for reporting? Mr. Top One, could you provide more details on that one?
Yes, sorry, my name is Mariusz, just to clarify. Basically, I am asking the best way, the best practice to put together financial information and the cases. Sometimes you keep some extra information on the top of the financial, and but these cases in case information are in one system, financial they are across two, three, and how to put this information together that they will work for the reporting, and reporting will be almost like in one place. So is it clarified, my explanation?
It is. That question can go many different ways. So I assume you're trying to display financial information from a case, for example, like let's say how much cost has been associated with a given customer account or something like that.
Yes, however, that financial information is one system, and the cases themselves are in another. And even this financial information are across maybe two, three. One is, for example, aggressor. And how this, what is the best practice to put these things together that will work for the reporting? So in the end, there will be nice report which gather all this information well from the different parts of the business.
Mm-hmm. You can take, you gotta almost, that's a deep question. So you have to kind of take a step back. First of all, is what data do you want to show, right? Second, does that data really need to be synced over? Are you gonna put a lot of strain on your integration for you to bring it over? Second, how often do you access this data? Is it every 15 minutes that you're pulling it up? If it's 5 minutes that you need to? Also, could you accomplish it with a Power BI report or some data warehousing that you can bring some of this data together, depending on how you need to look at the report? But we look at just because you need to see it every once in a while doesn't mean that you need to integrate it. Just keep that in mind. You want to make sure that the integration is kind of resilient and you're not bringing a lot of bloating the other system unnecessarily.
Okay, so I understand basically data warehouse would be good idea to gather this information put together, and on the top good reporting. However, just not to be crazy about the integration, to not um, slow down any of these systems a little bit. I understand. Is it a good understanding of your answer?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm looking at the so I'm looking at the chat here, and that's funny. And so dual right and all this stuff. I know I'm sorry, Microsoft, and I love you know, this is what we eat and breathe every day, but this is new technology, right? And it's kind of crawling right now, and it's becoming better and better. Totally, completely agree. And that is the future. No hands, you know, no questions asked. We just got to be very careful. Uh, Thank you, Reza. But we got to be careful as architects that we have to deliver this product that works. So we go with what's a little bit safe, especially for big multi-year implementations. We go with that first, and then to your question, um, guys here earlier, is we got to make sure that we know a strategy, what data we need to display, how is it going to be used, how often, and is it an aggregate report or is it specific line details? Because Power BI is good for aggregates, but you can do an SSRS report, for example, for an FSR or field service report, or maybe you do a number of calls and get through CDS some data. So it really depends. if you want to, drop us an email, and then I can share a lot of my experience. Totally cool. Would love to also hear what you're trying to build. Super interested. Okay. Awesome, guys. Any other questions? Mr. Andreas, any other feedback here?
No, I think we're good to go to the next slide. And to Reza's point in the chat, right? This is why the next few topics are the ugly. But we've had a number of challenges specifically around the data integrator, timeouts, and so on. And there is, if anybody is on the data integrator or using the data integrator, one of the main things to really consider is volume, and make sure you really have a good handle on the amount of volume that's going through the integration. And then two, there are some known issues out there at the moment still with the entities, and that can have a significant impact on your data integrator or CDS in general, the data integrator projects. I don't want to divert too much off of this, but if anybody has questions on a technical level, we'd be more than happy to address those towards the end in the Q&A session.
Awesome. Thanks, Andreas. So going into the future, and I think we may be missing one of the, I think we're missing one of the screenshots, Mr. Andreas. This is my bad. So we probably have to talk about it kind of out loud here and then ask some questions or answer. Or maybe Andreas, is there a way, Dion, to be able to have Andreas share as well here? I think we're missing one slide.
Absolutely. Yeah, I can make a presenter.
Too as well. Yeah, so Andreas, I'll give it back to you in a minute.
Okay, you guys can be both presenters at the same time. There you go. Girls.
Thank you. It's lean Dion every time I try to make sure that we get it right. Anyway.
You did remember I said that. That's awesome.
Yeah, I will never forget that for the rest of my life. All right, so let's move back here in the field service integration. So we talked about DI, dual right? It's first of all, it's one or the other. It's not I get dual right for some times and I get DI for some others. And so you got to make sure that if you're going to bite the bullet and go be one of those awesome trailblazers, that you got a plan, right? So if you're not going to go with dual right, just making sure that you identify the system of record for main entities, and make sure that you know what direction you need to go. And also codependencies is pretty important, so that we make sure that it goes back and forth there. So for example, customer assets has a dependency on the customer asset type, or agreement has a dependency on agreement types. So if you're creating agreement types in one system and using them in another, you want to make sure that that's correct and that the timing is correct for the dependencies as well. The next one is also get really familiar with FNO or FNSC data management module and understand the dependencies, and also really start focusing a lot of DevOps communications for integration changes, and create a design with regards to legal entities, right? So if I have 10 legal entities in FNO, are the users in CE or field service going to see the same thing? Are they all going to see the same work orders? Are they all going to have different configurations, or is it going to look different? And also testing the integrations and the flows and all the data dependencies. I cannot stress that enough. So I think Andreas is going to go into some of the mysteries or what happens behind the scenes here with regards to the errors that we get and some of the tricks of setting this up. So Andreas, do you want to share?
I can, yep.
Thank you.
Make sure.
This sort of virtual meetings, Dion, is I wish I could just see everybody's face.
I know we were very disappointed as well that you guys weren't coming to Florida and everybody else, all the people on the phone. But you know what? At least now we can have people from all over the world on a call, right? We had some people from Belgium, from Paris, so at least that was great.
Yeah, no, it's fantastic.
And there we go. You can see.
Can
your
you
screen.
guys see? Yeah.
Yep.
Okay. So a couple, so really while we're going back to the ugly, and the ugly being, for lack of better words, the data integrator, right? Well, and at this stage in time, it's stabilized enough where it has become a viable way to integrate between CE and F&O or F&O to CE. There are definitely some nuances about how to go about integrating. Right? And so we'll talk about a few of the ugly aspects of it. And one is, first and foremost, the organization to legal entity mapping. So again, in finance and operations, I'm going to refer to it as finance and operations. Just hopefully everybody is still with me when I say finance and ops. The way records are identified is by data area ID or the legal entity. Okay, and when you set up a connection set, which is what the data integrator provides you, you have to specify a legal entity and then the organization on the sales side, so on the CE side. This feels like it makes sense and works, but the reality of it is that the actual data sets themselves do not translate back and forth between the two systems like that. For example, if you have, we talked earlier about products, a product master coming from F&O into CE, if you have the owner being the organization, which is what the product entity is on the CE side, there is no delineation between which one of these finance and operations entities a product record is coming from. And that becomes problematic if you happen to use the exact same number sequence or the exact same product numbers in let's say you have 30 companies in finance and operations, you have 30 ever so slightly different product masters, release products is what they're called in finance and ops, but the numbers are the same. So what will happen is in the integration, it will end up overriding the last record to come over will quote unquote win. Okay, and that's not a desired outcome. You would want to ensure that you have the different product numbers between the quote unquote legal entities and organizations. So the way to get around that is you have to make customizations in CE. Now, if the entity is owned not by the organization, which is the standard entity that's owned by a team, then the owner on the record itself will tell you exactly which legal entity it comes across as. And then so that becomes something that you can work with a little bit more. But this is just one of those ugly things, quote unquote, that you will have to deal with if you integrate this way, and something to definitely be aware of and think about, because it does sneak up on you. In Dual Right, they did fix this with creating a company table that does mapping for you. Okay. The other aspect of it is, I was just talking about going from F&O or finance and supply chain to D365 CE. Now, if you go from field service or CE to F&O, the CE records do not have the notion of a quote unquote legal entity. An organization doesn't always exactly translate into a legal entity. Okay, and so when you architect your solution, your field service solution, and it is a multinational or global implementation, again, this is something to really be mindful and aware of. Does your data set properly translate into the financial system, right? And what does that look like? What we have to date found is that a customization is typically necessary for the entity. Okay. All right, moving on to another topic. So in the previous 2 slides ago, where we had a number of items about the ugly, there's a bullet point that says the air handling is less than helpful, right? And here are some less than helpful messages on the screen, right? The remote server returned an error, 400. AX encountered an error. A task was canceled. An export encountered an error. This, unfortunately, is just how it is. There's sometimes you get useful error messages back, and typically those are when there is an instant data mismatch. So, couldn't create record because the product wasn't found or something along those lines. But if there's deeper issues with things being quote unquote stuck, or systems are down, or for whatever reason there's a hiccup in the matrix, the error messages don't give you a very good idea of what happened. The question then becomes, how do I retrigger? And if I retrigger, what am I retriggering? What do I need to send across? Again, so these are some of the things to think about, right? There is a way in the data integrator now to see how many records, and you can resend the same data set. But it's always good to understand that a true up may or may not be needed at some point in time. Okay. Another point here is, as if you are an implementer, right? If you depending on which way to go, if you're implementing, and at some point you need to hand this off to your customer. So I also recommend that train the support team early. You have to have a good understanding of what is flowing where, which system is doing what, and what is the fallout to be able to properly address these kinds of errors. Okay. And another topic, while this isn't really the quote unquote ugly in my mind, it's just sort of a quote unquote necessary evil, advanced queries. So this is something that you can turn on or off, and once you have enabled it in a data integrator project, you cannot turn it off. So there is, again, nuances around advanced query. It's almost the equivalent of writing code. However, there are very specific things that it does and does not do. There's some known issues. If you are planning on going to integrate and using the data integrator, again, this is hopefully not something, the dual writes getting to a point where this is likely not going to be the option that you go with. But if you're in the middle, or if you have a client live or somebody is live and you are using the data integrator, to properly troubleshoot and change and get integrations moving, you have to use the advanced query. There's really no, at some point in time you will with one of your projects. There's really no way around it. And it is extremely helpful to have OData knowledge and understand what the protocol does and doesn't do, because that's really what the advanced query is. It's a GUID to write OData when you are sending from CE to F&O, and from F&O coming back to CE, it's a slightly different format than OData. But OData is definitely, we have found, is something that it's a knowledge or a skill set that without it, it would be very, very difficult to properly architect and deal with creating a solution. So I'm going to stop sharing here and open it up for any questions.
And then I'll go ahead and share on my side. Oh, pick the other screen. Any questions, guys? Reza, we know you got one.
I'm just trying to be cognizant of other people. So I would love for you guys to talk about non-DI and dual write integrations. Is that too much to ask, like for future presentations?
Oh yeah.
So how do you integrate field service with other ERP systems that cannot leverage dual writes and data integration, or data endpoints, as Andreas positioned it?
from a technical perspective, right? So CE exposes OData, right, and or you have CDS. So what we typically do is we do an analysis of what the receiving system or the system or systems that we need to integrate to, what the capacity and capabilities are, right? Do you have the ability to integrate the web services, or is it maybe more of a legacy system where you have to go through with file-based integrations? So that's step number one. Step number two, if you're not planning on using the data integrator, the question is what does the customer already have? What's part of the landscape? Do they already have a middleware system? Yes or no? And if they have one, then we do an analysis there. If they do not have a middleware platform, then the next recommendation is okay, that's something that we should be talking about, right? So it's, again, to Lucas's earlier comments with some of the other questions, the way we typically like to approach this is we take a step back, you get a holistic picture of everything, and then start drilling down into each one of the areas as it makes sense. Understanding what field service or CE provides you allows you to at least have one stake in the ground, and then it's really determining where that stake, how to tie the string to the next stake.
Great answer. Thank you.
Yeah, it's fascinating for us. So I'm sharing again here, and it is fascinating because field service now continues to grow, right? So wave 2 is going to add more functionality. So funny enough is that we worked with Gittler and some of the guys at the Microsoft team on functional locations, right? What they call the technician experience per se, and being able to tell whether this customer asset is sitting here versus there, or down the street or up above. And so those are one of the things that are going to make integrations a little bit much more interesting. To your point earlier about integrating with external systems, there's things like building reports, right? There's safety systems, there's other power apps and things like that we integrate. And we're starting to see kind of this evolution from an integration perspective that is just going to get much more interesting. And as Microsoft continues to get field service or making it forward a little bit more, putting a lot of more emphasis in assets or asset management, it should get super interesting out there for years to come. So let's go kind of wind down here, make sure that we got some time for questions. I'm going to share this with you guys basically. So we talked a little bit about dual write, what's coming in, what's the future, whatnot. Also, how to being able to get some more of the information. And one of our recommendations is going with the dual write Yammer group. So Rama it's a pretty good lead, and she shares a lot of insights and details, and you're also able to kind of troubleshoot things before you really want to try it out with a client. So become friends with them, right? They want your feedback, they want you to try it out, and they also want you to use it so that we get more folks into this integration. And then lastly, guys, if you guys haven't got a chance, please go and just look at the good, the bad, and the ugly, the trailer. That's the old school old Western movie. So as you guys can tell, I'm a big fan. So with that, just going to open it up for some questions and then close it up here with the team. So Dion, I know you do a lot of field service. Do you have any questions, thoughts, comments here?
No, I think it was a really great presentation. I don't get into the implementation stage of things, as you know, because we used to work together. So I get the fun stuff, right? I get to like do the demos, and then I just hand it off to somebody else and like, good luck with that. So, so I don't really have any questions in regards to that, but thank you guys so much. Let me see if there's any additional questions, and feel free, guys, if you want to unmute your line to ask these guys a question, please feel free to do so. In the meantime, I want to remind everybody to please go in and complete that survey, right? We're going to have the gift cards, Let me just see if I can put that survey URL here in the chat so people can actually go ahead and access that. We're going to give everybody just a couple of minutes, obviously, to complete that survey, and then we're going to go ahead and give away those prizes. So please make sure that you guys make it to that final, right, that final session at 5:30. And let me put that link of that session in there as well. There we go. So you guys can join from there. And these recordings will be up as well on the YouTube channel. Let me see here. I think I had that on here as well. Yeah, here it is. So this is, I believe, the YouTube channel that these sessions are going to be posted at in a couple of days. Thank you guys so much.
No, it is our pleasure being with you guys. Drop us questions. We're on LinkedIn, Facebook, whatever you want. Just hit us up, because we love sharing this experience with us, with everybody, and we believe that we're pretty community oriented. So if we all rise to a better level, we're gonna to the next step. We're gonna be able to provide this to our clients and have better implementations and have a better future overall. So we're always here for you guys, and really appreciate Ms. Dion to be with you guys. I can open it up for some questions or anything else.
Lucas, can I have final question to you?
Yeah.
Basically, my question is how much time, how important in your project is data governance, like having the roles, data steward, data consumer, data owner, and working on these kind of things? Is it taking 10%, 20? How much you work with this, and what do you think, how important is for the successful project data governance?
Oh, yeah. So you guys ready? Grab grab something cozy, because we're gonna be here for a while. No, just kidding. But so it is very important to have, first of all, before you start doing anything, you got to make sure that you understand your data structure, your data flow, and then on top of that, you have your data governance, right? Like, so what system becomes a system of record? How often are you going to have, let's say, a customer import? In this case, we use a software called Prophecy in one of our clients. So how often is that going to be a load being done? Who has access to it? What security roles can edit that data, right? We don't want to have folks changing the address of a site just randomly. So there's a whole strategy to it. But to the percentage, I would say it's always at least probably 40%, 30%. Andreas, I don't know. I'm just trying to.
Well, Reza wrote 80%. So I think I typically would recommend you have a data architect as part of your implementation, and you should allocate, I agree with Reza here, at least 80% integration and data. As implementers, we know that, if the data is bad, you're going to have a really rough go live, right? And so in the pre-go live sort of phases, if the data, it's the GIGO, right? Garbage in, garbage out notion. So it is definitely a measure and a criteria for success. So the more percentage you can dedicate to it, the better. I would always over allocate for this if you can, if the budget allows for it.
Yeah, make sure that it's important, especially when you're dealing with this kind of two systems. It's super important.
If we can add something there, because this particular topic is very close to my heart. There are a couple of things that I always consider when doing integrations from the data quality perspective, and a lot of people confuse data quality and data integrity. Data integrity is part of it. Like, one, accuracy, like is the data that you're bringing into the other system correct and precise? Completeness. Do you have all the information that you need for each integration scenarios that you're bringing into the other system? The uniformity, the data that is in the source system and the target system are the same, and uniqueness, as Andreas mentioned, when we bring data from one system to another system, the method that we choose, the GUIDs and everything presents the record from the unique perspective, and the timeliness, and is the information up to date. So and security, ownership, and as Andrea said. So there are so many things about data quality that makes an integration successful. And if you're not considering them, doesn't matter what technology you use, it doesn't matter what synchronization method, bidirectional, semi-directional, one directional, doesn't matter. You bring bad data, you're gonna pooch the
Have a
system.
bad time.
So yeah, exactly. So very important.
Yeah. Thank you, guys. We can spend a whole evening on this topic because it's near and dear to all of our hearts. But as we, with regards to wave two, what's coming up, the application keeps morphing, keeps changing for the better. So just keep in mind that as the new wave two release comes in and you get it implemented, how does that affect your integration strategy? Could we leverage? Do we have additional integration points and things like that? So get ahead of it, read the release notes, understand, talk to Microsoft, make sure that there's no new entities changing, no new fields that are going to disappear all of a sudden. That's rare, but just make sure that you look at it with a magnifying glass when you comes to the new releases to make sure that you have a successful implementation. So thank you, guys. I think we're off to our time. As always, we're here. Thanks to our sponsors. Really appreciate the time and hope you guys have a great Saturday. Enjoy and stay safe out there.
And thank you so much. I couldn't find my unmute button so fast. I'm just going to go ahead and stop the recording. Guys, don't forget to be on that final session